Hey, hey. How y'all doing? Good afternoon, everybody. Trying to get my OBS turned on. Alive by the grace of God. Yeah. Heavy weekend, I suppose. Yeah, some sort of fifth. Okay. I had a great weekend. Yeah, I got water. I'm working on that too. I made a ton of barbecue Friday, pulled pork and ribs, smoked it all day. Have like a whole ton, like a fridge full of barbecue to eat for the next week. So I'm pretty happy about that. And then just didn't do a damn thing all weekend. Well, I finally got Disney Plus and watched the newer, I guess it came out last year, The Lion King. That was pretty good. I guess I can finally watch The Mandalorian now. Yeah, just smoking meats. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I like the Star Wars books back in the day, so I don't know how much I'm gonna like this. All the new Star Wars stuff kind of pisses me off because it goes way off the extended universe stuff. But we'll see how this one is. All right, where windowed projector preview. There we go. Pull my chat back out. All right. Yeah, the new movies are terrible. Also went back and watched episode 4 this weekend. Just because, it's on Disney Plus, I may as well. All right, so how did y'all feel about the project? All Star Wars movies are bad. Yeah, that's maybe an unpopular opinion. Not going to argue that, AWS is jank. Please never give something that difficult again. I have a feeling, Max, you're going to be slightly disappointed. I think it's the CGI. Yeah, I mean they have the clip where like Han actually steps on Jabba's tail, and he goes like, "Urgh." So I think that's the newer CG version. So let's talk about. So the previous project was good. I think almost everybody got full points. The people that didn't, I think, were able to fix their stuff and then resubmit. So I'm not going to go look at grades while you guys are staring at my browser here, but so the next project is available. I'm just going to keep this next module, and I'm still working on that one because I'm trying to cut out PHP stuff and add in Node.js and Nginx stuff instead. So I'm trying to stay a project ahead of you guys. The quiz tomorrow is covering what we go over today. The quiz tomorrow is pretty much focusing on this basic web programming concepts. I think it's entirely based on how URLs work and what URL parts are, what they do, that kind of stuff. So I think we've already done all the AWS stuff. I think we've gone over the HTML basics. I'm going to just talk about project 2 real quick, so it's due in 2 weeks. We'll see if we can get there. There's a lot of JavaScript stuff I want to get through, so I'm going to try and get through all of this stuff today so that I can start on JavaScript on Wednesday and then probably spend a day and a half on JavaScript basics, what the language is, how it works, what are the weird things about the language. And by the way, the quiz isn't tomorrow, it's Wednesday, but yeah, same thing. So I want to start on that on Wednesday, finish that up next Monday, and start talking about the framework that, the starter code that I'm going to give you guys to write the project. The next project is Tic-Tac-Toe. It's all in the browser. You don't have to communicate with the server except to pull down the HTML and the JavaScript. You click on stuff. There's an AI that at the very least randomly chooses a blank space. I'll talk more about how not to do that. If you do it with a while loop, just hoping that your random choice isn't full, I might take a point or two off of that. You should actually only randomly pick from open spaces. Detect the win conditions, detect cat game, disable all the buttons when the game ends, show who wins, show a free refresh button that should reload the game. No JavaScript and HTML, no attributes like on click in your HTML stuff. You want to bind your clicks to the buttons and actually probably create the buttons all using JavaScript to add them to the page that way. And then just use decently understandable variable names and indentation. If you happen to be just coding and then pasting to your server using Vim, yes, we will be going over React. That'll be further along in the class. We're going to do some plain Jane JavaScript because that's what everything else is built on. So if you understand this, you can understand all that other stuff and what it's doing under the covers. Just remember to use set paste in Vim so that it doesn't actually muck up your indentation. If your indentation's just all over the place, I will probably take a few points off because it hurts my eyes to read it. But if you're, using tabs versus spaces, I'm going to tell you, I'll just tell you now that I prefer tabs, but it's not like it matters. I'm not going to take points off of that. And then there's some starter code and a little bit more filled out code that you can kind of see the progression of my own thought processes. How am I going to read your code? Well, I'll talk a little bit about how that's possible today, but basically I'm going to open it up in the browser. And because the JavaScript is all client-side JavaScript, those files are available in my browser and I can just look at them. So when we get to Node.js, I will not be able to see the parts of your code that are running on the server in Node.js, but for anything that gets delivered to the browser, I will be able to see that and grade it and won't have a problem. So for this one, just give me a URL, just like your last one. And here's the grading rubric in case you were wondering kind of how everything breaks down if you decide not to implement certain parts because you run out of time or you have other things that are more important than my class. Here's how you can pick and choose what's most valuable to do, I guess. Because I know you guys, aren't just taking my class, right? So, excuse me, I have like a sore throat today. Yeah, everybody's gonna be, yeah, see, yeah. No, it's not the COVID. Well, yeah, actually, probably true. Too many cigarettes. Of course, I just like smoked one right before I got in. Like, all right, my last meeting was supposed to end at 3:30 and it ended at like 3:59. I was just like, quick, get one in. Yeah, that wasn't maybe not the best idea if I'm going to be talking. Okay, so we've gone over a little bit of HTML basics. We did some of this in the Sublime stuff yesterday. Let's see if I can open, where is my Sublime window? Not yesterday, last Wednesday. So here's some of the project stuff we went over last Wednesday. You guys remember some of these tags, H1, image tags, A tags. Y'all used it. I don't know if you just blindly used it based off of what I did in my videos here and, replayed the video and just blindly copied what I did, which is fair. I noticed some of y'all even blindly copied the IP address of my instance. That's not the best thing to do, and I took points off of that until you fixed it because you needed to load it from your instance. I will talk a little bit about this real quick. If you take that off, it's just going to load it from whatever host the page loaded from. And if you take off this, it'll load it from whatever project or folder that your page loaded from. So for example, if you have a source of this, it will tack on, let's say, you know, your host is 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you do HTTP 1.2.3.4/index.html to load your page, and your source is this thing. The browser is smart enough to say, oh, yeah, well, that means I need to go to HTTP 1.2.3.4/icons/blah, blah, blah. So it totally is smart enough to do that. This is called, I don't know, there's a couple of different names for it. I call this is host relative, but it's still, the path itself is absolute because it starts with a slash. So an actual fully relative path would be if you started with something like project 1 / or as some of you had fun doing, project 1. So if you loaded it from there and your image source was something like, actually, let's do it this way, like this, the browser will start, because this path here does not start with a slash, it is relative to the folder that it loaded your index from. So that means the URL your browser is going to use to try and get that image is this. So a couple of different ways that your browser interprets those tags based on whether it starts with a protocol like the one that we have here. This starts with a protocol and an actual host, so that's fine. It'll actually go and it will go to some other host from where you loaded your page from, which is not what I wanted for the project. So I would have taken points off for that if you did that. The best way to do it is probably the totally relative way, because then if you move, let's say you have project 1 and you don't feel like retyping all of this boilerplate to start project 2, or maybe project 2 builds on project 1 or something like that, you want to copy these around, you can just copy the files from project 1 to project 2 and you don't have to go in and edit these paths in your HTML. So it's much more modular, I guess. I almost said malleable, but that's definitely not the right word. So that's a little bit about URL paths. I'll get into more URL stuff in a minute. We already talked about head and body, but if you click on these, they'll actually take you to the better documentation. I noticed some of you made your links, W3 Schools links. And besides the Rick rolls, that maybe was the most, you know, stab in the back kind of thing. But, you know, you just do what you're going to do. That's fine. Yeah. And somebody actually just took a screenshot of their initial Ubuntu page and made that their image. And yeah, I was pleased with the dastardliness of all that. Yeah. So here you can read all about how, you know, here's an example, here's an example head tag. It'll tell you what attributes that you are allowed to use, which on the head tag really isn't much. But if we go back and look at something like, we talked a little bit about script and link, and we're going to go back to talking about, so link is for CSS. I'm going to kind of skip that for now. Body's where all of your actual HTML goes, so you can put a whole bunch more stuff on that. You have things like, hey, I'm not on my browser, sorry. So let's go back here. So I'm looking at the HTML basics, and if you click on this body tag, it'll take you to the not W3 Schools, the MDN, Mozilla Developer Network web docs. These attributes will tell you, hey, here's all the things you can put on it. This method is non-conforming, use CSS blah, use it blah, blah, blah. So you also have all these callbacks like on blur, on error, on click, probably on load. These are the things that I don't want you to use, okay? So if you were to use these, you would be putting JavaScript into your HTML. So for example, let's go back to Sublime. Let me find my Sublime. Okay. I'll move that up a little bit. There we go. All right, so in your body tag, you could do onload equals and say init. And so what this will do, you are not, this is a JavaScript function. You're not just passing a function pointer in like this, you're actually executing a JavaScript function. You could pass variables into this like false and Bob and that kind of thing. Although because of the double quotes we have on the outside, we can't use double quotes on the inside. And that's fine. Double quotes and single quotes are almost entirely interchangeable in HTML and JavaScript. Double quotes just get like your /ns and stuff actually get executed into new lines and all that jazz. So this, I don't want you to do this. It will work. And I guess I should actually put a script tag in here. Script, text use JavaScript, source equals, and I think this is the right way to do it. Let's find out. There we go. No. What am I doing? Oh, yeah. Just close it. There. Okay. So source equals index.js. That's fine. And then maybe in index.js, I have const init equals function open close. All right, so this is a nice little init function. We can say console.log initting. And let's set some syntax on here. There we go. So let's save this to the project1 directory as index.js. And let's save this as well. Does it? Yeah, hey, syntax highlighting. Okay, so let's go SSH into our instance, my instance, following along at home, our instance, and we have our project1 directory that's spelled correctly on my server. And just to make sure, yes, we do have our symlink in var www.html. That project1 points to our place here. So in another window, I'm going to go into my project1 directory. I'm going to scp-i AWS and whatever my IP address is. No, okay. Actually, this is my IP address, isn't it? Hey, my laziness saved me something. Okay. -i AWS Ubuntu at, yep, still on Sublime. Let's go to this one. Okay. Colon, so the first part's your username, then an @sign, then your IP address, then a colon, then where you want to put it. So we want to put it in my home folders, project1 directory, and just name it whatever we want here. Now I have the order wrong because I need to say what I'm copying first and then where I'm copying it to. So what I'm copying is everything in this directory. So if I do that, it copied everything. Let's go back over to Ubuntu, cd into project1 and look at it. We have index.js and index.html. Let's see if I can get that stuff to load in the browser. Okay, and if I pull up the console and refresh the page, it does not say anything. Why not? Oh, do I need to? I bet you I need to turn on. Where's my network? Is there a disable cache? It is not actually pulling down the script tag. Did I do that wrong? Let's find out. It's been a while. Oh, you just put a source in there? Let's see if it actually even pulled down the updated version of this file or if I need to clear my cache. Let's just do that. Inspect. If I go look at the head, it does not have a script. And if I look at the network tab and look at the file it actually pulled down, hey, that's because I'm on the wrong file. /project1. Okay, so we have something, but it didn't actually do me any good. It did pull down index.html, so I'm kind of going over how to use some of your developer tools. So the network tab here shows you all of the connections and files that your browser has actually attempted to pull down. So let me see, if I look at the actual content of this, I can look at the response and response payload, and it'll show me the exact text that it pulled down. So that's cool, but it looks like this type equals text JavaScript. It looks like I think I broke this. I probably need to actually end my script tag. Just because. So let's switch back over to this thing, and I edited my file. So if I cat index.html, we can see here that I didn't save it. And so now I cat it again. Whoa, what? I just saved it. Oh, wrong window. All right, I'm getting the hang of this. So here we now have an actual closed script tag, and let's rerun our SCP to copy both of those to the server, and let's see if this works. It works. So there was some broken HTML. Apparently script tags cannot, if you see here under my window, script tags, even if you have a source, you can't just end them like you do with other tags. You actually, other tags that have no children. So like the image tag that we put in, if I go back to Sublime, the image tag is a kind of a self-ending tag. You don't have to have a separate close tag. For script tags, you kind of do, or it breaks stuff. But that, you got to see kind of my process for, you know, how to debug, okay, what did it pull down? And if I go look at the response payload now, we notice that all of this is actually syntax highlighted, where before head and everything below it was just in black text. So that was kind of my clue that I had screwed up the formatting a little bit. And if I go, it's saying it's going to call init false Bob. Let's see why that didn't actually get called. So let's pull up the console. It did. See, we see initting here. So that means our init function got called. Not the right way to do it. I'm going to go back to Sublime for a second. And this is kind of a tangent, and I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. But let's get rid of this. Let's go over here, and let's do window dot add event listener. Load is the event we're adding to, and the callback we want to add is init. Notice this time, whereas before, we actually were invoking this function. So this string of JavaScript gets run, which then calls our function in the JavaScript file. Here, we're just passing in a function pointer. I'll talk a little bit more about how JavaScript works next week, but we are not actually, if we did this, that wouldn't work because this defaults to return undefined because we don't define a return statement. So if we did this, it wouldn't actually call anything. It would try and invoke a function that was actually an undefined variable. So without that, when it is ready to invoke our load event handlers, listeners, it'll actually run our function up here. And if we wanted to pass in variables, we have to be a little bit tricky about that. It's not as easy as it was in onload, but for this specifically, that should work. So let's get rid of our onload, save that, and let's go back to our terminal and upload again and refresh the page. And let's make sure that our page actually has the new stuff on it. So if we look at our body tag here, it does not have an on load anymore, but down here we see that it is actually still a knitting. So awesome. That was a huge tangent about script tags that probably could have waited till next Monday. But A tags, you guys, we've already talked about that. Button tags, we will be using buttons. We won't be writing buttons in HTML. We'll be writing them in JavaScript. So don't worry too much about that. We'll get back to buttons later, but you can put buttons directly into your HTML if you want. You can put a name on there, you can put an on click, and the stuff you put inside the button is the stuff inside the button. So press me is press me. Awesome. UL is unordered lists. So if we look at this, we can see UL and LI is a list item, and LI works in unordered and ordered lists. So if we start it with UL, then we have all these children. So here's a list item for milk, which we can see here is just got a dot next to it. Awesome. Here's a list item for cheese, which has the same dot next to it. Blue cheese and feta are indented because we didn't close this LI here. So this is still open, which means this whole unordered list is a child of this cheese list item. Is that making sense? Do we need to talk more about HTML children and how closing tags works? Everybody good so far? Okay. So if I change this to an ordered list at the top, you also have to change the close tag at the bottom to an ordered list. And does this actually work? I guess it doesn't. I guess this is not built to do what I think it is. Unless there's a run button somewhere, but let's undo that. It's not actually running that code. That's awesome. Okay. Maybe W3. Okay. All right. Well, fair enough. If I reset it, there's no button. How is it that Mozilla's browser doesn't work on Mozilla's page? That's wonderful. Okay. Well, you know what? Maybe it's better that you guys actually see me continuing to edit code because that's a good process to have anyway. So I'm going to paste this unordered list in there. And I'm going to do tabs because I hate spaces. All right, so we have this unordered list, and let's save it and upload it and go back to the project. And here we go. Maybe. There we go. So we have this milk, cheese, blue cheese, feta. Awesome. And if I want to change the top, Control Enter, you think? Let's try that. Nope. I think there's probably something underneath this that probably shouldn't be underneath that. That's my theory. I could inspect it and find out, but I don't care anymore. So yeah, we have the unordered list there. And if I go back to Sublime and change this to ordered list at the top and at the bottom, but leave these this unordered list inside here, notice I'm not changing these list items. They're all still LIs inside here. And then let's upload and back to the browser. We can see that we have 1 and 2 because they're an ordered list now. And then we have blue cheese and feta, which are unordered lists. So that's how that's a basic on, ooh, where did we go? I just pulled that out. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so tables. I don't even know if I want to talk much about tables because I really don't want you to use them. But here's how tables work. You have a table tag, you have a whole table head section and table body section. In accessibility speak, like if you're trying to work with screen readers and that kind of stuff, tables should only be used for displaying actual tabular data, like an Excel spreadsheet of data or something like that. Tables should never be used for actual laying out your web page. Back in the early 90s, everybody used tables to lay out their web page. It's a terrible thing. The web has consistently been worse for it. If you really want to lay out things in a kind of table-like format, in like a square format, try CSS box model. No, not box model. What is it? Ah, grid. There we go. Of course, the first link. Okay. So we have these HTML classes, or these classes, CSS classes that are applied in HTML. In CSS, we say, all right, our wrapper is a display type grid, and we give some columns and grid gaps. And I'm not going to go over what all this means because I don't expect you guys to actually use this, but here's kind of what you can do with grids. Flexbox is also good. It's just the controller works. It's just the okay. Well, I gave up on that anyway. Flexbox is also a good one. But here, if you want to do something laying out stuff with a table-like format, just kind of consider using CSS grids. I don't really, even for the tic-tac-toe thing, we're just going to put 3 spans in a div. So I guess let me talk about divs first. So div and span. A div and a span are kind of the same thing, except a span does not put a new line at the end. It doesn't put a line break into your code. And now is a good time to make sure you guys understand that what you put into this code does not have to be indented at all. And it can all be on the same line if you want it to. So if I find, nope, that's not the right thing. So let's find all of the new lines and delete them. This will still render the exact same web page. Let's see if I'm right. Upload in my terminal and go back to the browser. Yep, same thing. And if we go look at the code that was delivered, we can see that it's all one page. This is actually something, yeah, it is so gross. This is something that minification does, because every one of those new lines is a byte. And every one of those bytes, if you're sending down something that's, you know, getting hit 5 million times a day or something like that, that's 5 million, that's 5 megabytes you're saving per new line just to get rid of those. So there's a reason to do this. It's kind of like looking at compiled code though, and it's not something you should actually do. It's not like, you shouldn't write code this way, but it makes a point of, let's get that back out of here. Okay, so let's put a div in here. Div. So one thing that proves though is that if I put 3 new lines in here and then put a span and say 1 and a span, if I can type, span 2, let's just do this, 3, okay. And then I end my div. So none of this new line is going to get rendered because your browser is not actually taking the new lines and stuff that you have in your code. It's not reading any of the white space that you have in your code. It's reading only the HTML tags. It skips all white space before it starts parsing. Not all white space. If you have spaces inside of a tag like that, it will read it. But a lot of times if you have multiple spaces in there, I don't think it's going to read that either. So let me upload this and see what it does. Back to the browser, refresh. So we just have 1, 2, and 3. They're all right next to each other. And there is no extra spaces in this A tag either, in this A tag. So you can put 1 space in and it'll trust that. If you want multiple spaces here, you have to actually do ampersand, which this is not really something you should do, and I'm not going to test you on it, non-blocking space in BSP. And you just have to do that multiple times. So let's do bloop, bloop, bloop. Okay. So let's get rid of all this extra white space. I think I've proven my point. And maybe I want to put some Let's put a little bit of margin around this. So I'm going to just, for the fun of it, where is my, how do you do the script? Is there a CSS script? I can't remember how to do CSS scripts. Screw it. I'm not going to mess with it. Let's do it this way. They should all inherit, right? Style equals margin 5 px. That might work. And I'm going to copy this a few times. Let's do this.
Hey, I just want to let you know we can't see the Sublime right now.
Yeah, I'm pretty bad about that. I'm sorry, guys. Thanks for speaking up. Okay, so I'm going to try and do style margin equals 5. I think these spans will inherit that style. And then this is the non-blocking space stuff that I was talking about earlier. So that should actually put spaces in there. Let's go save this, run my SCP command again, and switch to the browser. Let's see what that does. Well, the div has the margins, but I don't think the spans do. But we do have multiple spaces in here, so that's nice. If you want to have multiple spaces, you can't just hit space a bunch of times, but one will actually work. Everything after one gets eaten by the browser. Let's see. Anybody have any? Would it be easier to use one of your other monitors and display capture? It might be. I just got tons of crap on my desktop and like 50 other windows open. And so I'm trying not to do that. But if it continues to be a problem, I'll just have to bite the bullet and do it that way. Okay. Anybody have, I guess I'll switch back to Sublime. Anybody have any questions about some of this code that I've written so far? I'm going to go talk about more about divs and spans on Monday and Wednesday next week. But this is just a little starter on HTML, which maybe should have been done last week before your project was due, but I kind of gave you guys that code anyway, so you suffered through it. The main difference between what, Zach? Div and span? So spans, you can have multiple spans next to each other and they will not put new lines. So if we go back to the web page, you'll see that 1, 2, and 3 are all stuck together, but everything in divs gets bumped down to a new line, break. So if we actually inspect the element here, we can look at each of these divs is taking up the whole page, and it goes all the way over, and then inside that each span is just one little block. So div stands for divider. It's like a vertical divider. That's what the tag originally meant. Now it's actually just divs and spans are like the most used placeholder tags for just putting random stuff, all kinds of things like images or links or just a button. Even I've seen people use buttons. Do you have to write any HTML aside from boilerplate head and body stuff? What do you mean? Like eventually? Oh, for a web page? No, you can just do a head, a body, and a couple of script tags, and then you can have your JavaScript load everything else if you needed to. I would say, but there's a little bit of a give and take. A lot of times if you have a ton of JavaScript being downloaded, you want to show your users like a template of your web page while you populate it with all of your data and widgets and buttons and stuff like that. So it's nice to have some sort of HTML already loaded, because the HTML will load first, and then your browser is going to read all the script tags and go back and get all of that data in a subsequent connection. Most of the time, you can do fancy stuff with Speedy and HTTP2 and bundling stuff up that way. But for normal HTTP connection, HTTPS connection that browsers will do to Apache or Nginx or anything like that, it's going to first get the index page, the HTML page. It's going to render all of that while it's also using the network to get your next file. And if you're on like a mobile network and the file is like 5 megabytes because the JavaScript file is 5 megabytes because they aren't using the minified version of a framework, which literally was a problem with one of the Clemson COVID pages earlier this year till I told them, you know, minification's a thing. You want the user to have something to see, like you can even embed a little spinny GIF in there that says, hey, I'm loading, you know, and all that stuff will happen while the JavaScript's loading, and like being downloaded and then populating the rest of the page. So there is a give and take, but for the Tic-Tac-Toe project, let me switch back to Sublime real quick. For the Tic-Tac-Toe project, the HTML is simply this. And then everything else gets added inside the app div. So your JavaScript just says, all right, set up an on-page load and then get a document get element by ID for app, and then just start creating nodes and adding them to the page under the app node. And you can just build out all the rest of your buttons and everything else. Would I say that divs and spans are mostly used for formatting, or is there another purpose? I think generally speaking, you should only be using HTML for formatting. Even if you want to put a button on a page or something like that, it's all formatting and visual representation. It's not necessarily, you don't want to put any functionality into your HTML. You also want to use the correct tag for what you're doing if you're dealing with something that might be used by screen readers. So for example, you want to use an H1 tag as your primary heading. Just because an H1 tag is really big and you think it's gaudy and you want to downgrade it to an H2 or an H3 just to make it look better, that's going to be interpreted differently by screen readers and stuff like that. You want your H1 to be smaller, you just attach a CSS class to your H1 tag that makes it smaller. In HTML5, there are section tags and nav bar tags and paragraph, well, paragraph's already thing, it's called a p tag, but that's a paragraph tag. But you want to use the right thing. So while yes, you can have a div tag that has an on click, I'm just going to break all of my own rules here. Click handler, and why am I doing this in this code? This needs to be in this code just because y'all don't really need to be worrying about project 2 yet. But I can put this here on click equals click handler, invoke it, and then whenever I click anywhere inside here, it's going to do something. So this is technically a button, or you are now turning a div into a button. I'm now kind of a button. And if I go over to my JavaScript and I define that click handler function, this should do what we want. So let me upload that to the server and switch back to the browser. Refresh this. Notice it doesn't look any different. We didn't do anything to make it look different. And it's actually, why is it not clicking? Because I didn't save my HTML. Okay. Refresh. I'm now kind of a button. I click on it, kind of button clicked. So this works. You can make a div tag into a button. You can even, let's say if I wanted to add some CSS to it, I could say, hey, you know what? I want a border 2px black. Did that do what I wanted it to? No. Yeah, solid. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, that's good. And if I click over here, it doesn't do it. Yeah, it does. See down here, it's actually incrementing this little 3. Is that off the page? That's totally off the page. Okay, that's wonderful. Let's read. Why is this a different size today? So, yeah, that's fun. Wonder how much of that y'all couldn't see. So way down here in the corner, there's a little 3, and it's really hard to see probably on stream. But if I click way up here where there's no text, that is now a 5. I clicked it twice. So it's saying that this has been console logged 5 times. So I've kind of made this into a button. Screen readers aren't going to think it's a button, though. And screen readers for blind people are going to be like, this is a div tag whose content says I'm now kind of a button. And users are going to have no idea that they can actually click that thing. So if we go back and we actually make it a button, let's see. And we leave everything else the same. Let's see if that does us any good. Browser, refresh. Why did it break? It totally broke. Okay, I didn't like that. Oh, yeah, I put it up there. I'm just looking in the wrong place. And I can click it, and it actually changes colors when you click it, and it has its own background, or it already has its own border. I did not leave the border background on it. Remember, I only made that change in the browser, so as soon as I refreshed, it went away. But it is still logging kind of button clicked. And so every time I click it, it will continue to do that. Anybody got any questions so far? I think I'm about ready to move on to this next page from the HTML basics page. So if anybody has any more HTML questions, ask them now or ask them later, or, don't ask them at all. I guess that's an option. Just be confused or Google it later. Anybody good? Everybody good? Anybody not good? Okay. Basic web programming concepts. Components of a web page. I think we've talked a little bit about this already. You have your style sheets, which are your CSS. You have your HTML file, and you have your scripts file, which is generally JavaScript. From our definition of HTML, hypertext markup language is the standard markup language for creating web pages, web applications with style sheets, CSS, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we kind of knew all that. URLs. This is kind of, there's not too many points on this in the notes, but this Wikipedia page gives you more than all of the information you will ever need. So you may want to study up on the parts and what delimiters make up these parts. It starts with a scheme, which can also be referenced as a protocol, because it tells you, HTTP, HTTPS. Can anybody think of any other schemes that they've seen in URLs? There's like tons of them. Anybody seen an email to : That's another scheme. There's a phone number one. There's an FTP one. Mail to, yep. SMS, tell, yep. All of those are things that still make up a valid URL. You just have a different, your browser will interpret this differently than trying to open it. It will try and call out to your operating system and say, hey, do you have something that can handle telephone calls? Because this is a this is a tell schema URL, right? And then you have your authority or host name. So this is a scheme or protocol. I kind of call it a protocol, but scheme is also correct. Authority or host name is, let's see, host. Okay, that's not very useful. So the authority is all of this stuff, because you can put user info here. You can put username : or username at host, or username : password at host, all into this thing. So let me switch back to my browser, and you can say https://craigb : password 1234 at canvas.clemson.edu. And if canvas.clemson.edu, okay, if canvas.clemson.edu were accepting this sort of basic authentication put into a URL bar, then this would actually work out and you wouldn't have to type in your login information. Canvas doesn't do that. Canvas uses that gray and orange login page and single sign-on and all that stuff. And also, it's pretty insecure to put your password directly in the URL bar. Generally speaking, you don't put hidden things like that in the URL bar because other people can probably see it in your browser history, and because URLs by themselves are not near as protected as transferring data with like as host data or something like that. But you don't really need to know this part. I'm not going to be testing you on the username and password, but this part right here, this is the host name. And I already told you before that you can put a port on here. That wouldn't work. That 8443 might. That's a higher level version of the same. A lot of people use 8443 as a higher level number for another SSL port. The default for HTTPS is 443. And if you leave it off, it will just assume it's 443. And then you have your path. So you have stuff here, blah.text. And then you have queries. So you have this question mark. So we already talked about the path stuff. Before I go on to the question mark, there is some interesting stuff. For example, you can have periods in your path. And since it's reading it from left to right, once it passes this slash, it knows that it's talking about a path and not a server. And so, yeah, we already have this period here between blah and text or blah and HTML. We've already seen that. But you can also say like example.com/blah.html. And that's totally valid. It's very confusing. And sometimes scammers will do that, where they will actually make some super long URL that's like based on, you know, evilserver.com and then all that, and then it might have like a ton of text here /clemson.edu/login.html. And if you're dumb, or if your browser's dumb enough to just show you the end of your URL, you'll see clemson.edu and you'll see that it has a green lock, but the green lock is actually saying that they have an SSL cert for evilserver.com, not for clemson.edu. But this is still a valid URL. This still works just fine. And it will still fish your information just fine. So, yeah, people get, it's amazing the kinds of things that hackers will think of sometimes. And the fact that Chrome and Safari are now like trying as much as they can to hide your actual URL doesn't make it any easier. Next, you have your path or your query variables. So a lot of times in Google, you'll have something like Q equals what I searched for. So this is a way to send variables to the server. So maybe HTML probably is not going to accept those, but it might just be like handler.go or .php or something like that. Or you could just call it .html and then run arbitrary code behind it that interprets all this stuff. But these are queries. So query parameters come in key value pairs. So you have, this is a key, this is a value, and you have an ampersand, and then you can do another key value. So you can say key 2 equals value 2, ampersand key 23 equals blah, blah. And a lot of times you need to encode it, sometimes with a space, sometimes your browser will do it for you. So this is called, I think, URL encode. So if we take something like this, and we go over, oh wait, no, that won't work. We can take, because each key and each value is URL encoded, but the whole thing is not. So let's go back over here and run a little bit of JavaScript. We can say URL encode, encode URI component. It's called URL encode in PHP, and encode URI, yeah, okay. And if I say blah, blah, and put a space in there, it's going to change it to blah %20 blah. There's also a different encoding that changes spaces to pluses. And if I were to try and encode something like, say, I wanted to send an ampersand as part of my variable, like what if, my username is Craig ampersand, right? That if I just had that directly in the URL bar, if I had key2, or let's say username equals Craig ampersand, and then have another ampersand to put on the next variable here, that's not really going to work well. So instead, they encode all of that stuff too. So let's do this, and let's put Craig ampersand into it, and we see it converts it to %26. And if I wanted to, you may be asking, well, then if it converts everything to percentages, what does it do with percentages? It also converts percentages just to a different number, %25. So if you ever see something, and I can actually, let's do, can you guys still see that? Okay, cool. Let result equal, and let's just grab this. So sometimes you'll see something that's just been encoded way too many times. And let's put result in here. Oh yeah, can't redefine a variable, but I can still save into it. And so if I keep re-encoding this, it's just gonna keep putting %25s where the previous percents were. So if you see something that has like a ton of %25s in it in a URL bar, they've probably gone through too many encoding passes. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not, but it definitely means like, hey, maybe you don't exactly know what you're doing running this web page. What else did I want to talk about URLs? So we have our queries. Does anybody have any questions about queries? Okay, so before I go on to fragments, I want to take a step back and say, all right, so this scheme, this is not necessarily sent to the server. You don't really say in your HTTP packet, hey, I'm trying to talk to you HTTP or HTTPS. That is done at a TCP layer or a different layer below your HTTP packet layer. So your HTTP packet does not contain the schema. Normally it will contain the user info. It won't contain the host because TCP is your transport protocol. TCP is going to deliver your message to the web server. Your HTTP packet does not necessarily have to have the host header in there or the information about what server it's trying to talk to in there. It will anyway. We'll talk about host headers later because we'll get to that later. It's a little bit confusing. It does not have to have the port. Sometimes it will as an HTTP header, which we'll talk about. It will have the path, and it will also have something else that's not put in here, which is the HTTP method. So get or post or delete or put or something like that. All of those methods will be part of that. Query also goes to the server, everything after the question mark. So path and query goes to the server. Fragment is only on your browser. Anything after this hash sign is called a fragment. So for example, if I were to click on, let's see, if I click on at the top references, it jumps me down to the references section. How does it do that? That's because it put hashtag references or # references for you older folks. It puts that at the end of your URL, and then if you go look at references, it is actually scrolling me the span with the ID references into view. So that's what that fragment does. You can use it for other things. You can actually put data into this that only your front end application uses, but that never gets sent to the server. I will probably ask you if fragments get sent to the server. The answer is no. Nothing after the hash sign ever gets sent to the server unless you copy it into another place like a cookie or header or something like that, and then send it to the server. Okay, there's also relative paths, which we already talked about. That's, this part, if you are referencing an image tag and you don't put a slash at the front, that would be a relative path. Or if you do put a slash at the front, It'll be relative to whatever host you loaded the page from. You can also just start your URL with // and I wholeheartedly recommend you do this. Does that work only for spans, or will that work for any element with an ID? It may work for any element with an ID. Certain things may be hard for the browser to find and scroll into view. I think that one was on a div, if I'm right. No, it was on a span. So it'll work for divs, it'll work for spans, it'll work for header tags, it'll work for most anything that actually shows up on the page. I don't think you can put it on like a script tag, for example. So yeah. Okay, so I highly recommend anytime you are actually putting a host name into a URL, which you shouldn't be doing very often, but if you have to do that, put // at the front. This means load this reference or load this URL or whatever with the same protocol that you loaded this page from. So a lot of times browsers will say, hey, you loaded this base page with HTTPS, but then you have these image tags that you're loading that you're trying to use HTTP on, and because of browser security and all this other stuff, I'm not going to go get that page for you because that could leak information that's not encrypted when you think that you're viewing an encrypted page. So they will just like flat out refuse sometimes to load an HTTP image or a CSS file or JavaScript file or whatever if the base page was loaded on HTTPS. Conversely, if you're, for the servers that we're running here, if you try to reference HTTPS to your server, you don't have that turned on, so that's not going to work either. So if you really have to specify a host, just put // in front of it. Don't ever put HTTP or HTTPS in front of it. I mean, you can. Lord knows I did it on my project one because I was just copy pasting stuff, but do as I say, not as I do. Okay. Any questions so far? We got about 10 minutes left. Hypertext transfer protocol. We talked a little bit about that. We're going to go into more about hypertext transfer protocol and how packets are crafted, how they're delivered, stuff like that on Wednesday. And I'll talk about the different parts of a packet, parts of a response packet, all communication to and from HTTP is encoded. Yeah, I'll go over all this. And then Chrome Devtools. We already talked a little bit about Chrome Devtools. And mostly you guys have just seen me using stuff. By Chrome Devtools, I guess I mean browser DevTools because I'm using Firefox this year for my main browser. But they both do the same thing, just the tools are in a little bit different place. I've tried spending whole days on the DevTools suite before, but it seems that a lot of times people don't really understand it till they have a need for it. So I'm going to just try and ease us into it by putting in a little bit of extra Chrome or DevTools information in as we're trying to debug stuff and find stuff. So that's pretty much the first half of Wednesday. And then we'll start talking about JavaScript, and we'll spend a lot of next week talking about JavaScript as well. I do also want to announce that on either the 14th or the 16th of September, I'm going to have the head of CCIT come in and give, I think, about a 50-minute or 1-hour talk on the life of a packet. So that will fill in some of the stuff between like, here's the HTTP packet, and then it is wrapped in a TCP packet, which is wrapped in this, which is wrapped in that. And how does it know what server to go to? Because servers are all IP addresses, not host names. He's going to talk all about that, like how a packet gets from your computer to Google and back, how it does ARP checks, how it finds the right switch, all that stuff. And he's going to give a nice long talk about it. He's done it for me every year. He's a great guy. So that'll either be on the 14th or the 16th. And then whatever other day, I forget what I'm going to do on that other day, but I had it planned at some point. So any questions? If not, you're free to go. I think I'll just stop here for the day. Thank you guys for a wonderful class. And I'm sorry I was a little negligent on the screen switching today. You're welcome. Have a good one, y'all. And nobody's got any questions, so I'm out. Hit me up in Slack if you need anything.